in the chat, so we can, or in the Q&A part, which serves as a chat. In a word, I'm going to start with you, Marietje, because you started off with rule of law. In a word, what's the biggest challenge do you see in regulating the internet? It's easy to say, oh, we should regulate the internet, but what is the biggest challenge, and explain why? Marietje.
Well, I don't think we should be regulating the internet. I think we should be regulating for principles. And sometimes that may include, ensuring that, for example, antitrust rules are upheld in the digital world, or non-discrimination principles. But I think the idea that we're regulating the internet is putting the wrong priority first, and allows companies to imply that they are under attack and that they are unjustly regulated. But I agree with Prabhat, it's about fairness. And it's about time that tech companies are going to be fairly regulated, because they've basically escaped regulation for a very long time.
Well, fascinating. So Marietje, you're saying that the narrative maybe is being won by them by saying, hey, regulating, I know a lot of tech companies had called for regulation, right? Regulate us. This is some controversy over some of this. You're saying don't follow in that regulates frame. Let's take the frame of like upholding laws and having principles, right? So switching that narrative, really, really interesting. George Orwell says that politics is communications, and you just proved that right there with just reframing some of the language around that. Prabhat, how about you? What is the biggest challenge to regulating or not, if that's not the question anymore, in a word, and if you could explain why?
Well, I mean, I think just three aspects that I'd just like to briefly mention. One is, I think a lot of the students who've come in, they've highlighted the kind of richness and complexity of things that we need to look out for. So it's not just about regulation. It's many of the students came in saying we need to support also innovation, blockchains. We need to have startups get access to money. Think about investors. Think about where students are going to learn, how they're going to learn, and what they're going to do afterwards. So just to say that all of these things are also on the mind of the Commission. So it's not just about regulation. I think it would be a mistake, first of all, if we narrow the conversation only to what we should regulate and what we should not regulate. That's my starting sentence, and I'm happy to put some links into the chat in case others can see that. Now, the second thing, the biggest challenge in regulation is, at European level, I think it's not, let's not start with the challenge, let's start with the opportunity. The opportunity is to lay down exactly the rules, like Marietje said, that reflect our values in terms of fundamental rights protections, in terms of rule of law, that really should govern our digital space. And these are really the words of Commissioner Breton, is to kind of take ownership of the digital space that we have, and lay down common rules that are consistent with our fundamental rights and are consistent with our kind of ideas of how this space should be governed. So that's the opportunity. So my first point was about the bigger challenge. Regulation is only one part, and maybe just the smallest and least important part of the whole conversation. The second one is that regulation is above all, I see it as an opportunity, because also, like many of the students have said, who've come in, is that there is a real opportunity to have laid on better and stronger protection for things like privacy, where Europe has been a pioneer, but also for illegal content online, like some of the things that have been mentioned. Now, to come to the challenge is that, we are a continent of 27 different countries, many different cultures, and of course the variety of different uses of digital services online is enormous and reflects the whole rich variety of our society. And of course, the challenge comes to that is to kind of identify what are the ground rules that make sense for everybody across the whole continent and that bring us all together.
Prabhat, let me follow up. I like your opportunity-minded approach, sort of glass more than half full. You talked about, though, the challenge being about these 27 different member states. So what's the opportunity and the diversity for the EU to handle this? Where's the silver lining there?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the approaches that we're taking, and it comes back to what Marietje said, is that are we really regulating the internet? What are we doing here? One of the objectives that we have with the Digital Services Act is not so much to say what should be online and what should not be online. That's something that is really not for a government, certainly not for the Commission to decide in a way. I think what we really are thinking about is that what are these procedures that we should have? It's a little bit like going to a concert hall. You expect there to be a fire extinguisher, a fire exit, an alarm button everywhere. And our approach is really to be sure that the safety infrastructure online is available for all digital services, and that this safety infrastructure is designed in such a way that it doesn't interfere what kind of music is being played in the concert hall, what kind of speech is being given. So that's just an analogy, and I think this is something that we can all agree on across, because it doesn't seek to harmonize or to kind of make a kind of uniform layer of bringing all of common standards to something that is kind of deeply rooted in different cultural traditions. So there may very well be some areas where we all agree that some types of content are illegal and they need to be outlawed across the whole continent. But the way to bring all countries and all cultures and all different users together, I think, is by putting the user first, by making sure that they have safety buttons available and safety procedures, that there is an accountability framework around some of the negative externalities that we now come across, particularly in the space of large online platforms. This was something that the Executive Vice President mentioned as well. And I think that these are all very broadly consensual at the moment.
It's really great. Are you a musician, by the way? I love the music metaphors. Are you a musician?
I like Woody Allen said, a lot of enthusiasm, but no talent.
I have a feeling there's more to probe there, but I'm going to go to some comments here from Anonymous. Just on the one word, it's really appropriate to bring in here. This person says, the one word on the European way is people-focused. Explanation, it's different than the US, that's business, successful business focused, and China focused on the party success, and the EU's way forward should and will be people-focused. Equality, fairness, privacy are core values that will be upheld in the future. We heard that through the students. We've been hearing that here. Danny, there's a lot of interest here in the chat around the Chinese way. I started off asking Marietje and Prabhat about what the challenge was. Prabhat did excellent ninja move and said, I want to talk about the challenges. So you get to talk about the challenges as well as the opportunities in regulation.
Well, so I work on the political consequences of digital technology, so especially social media and the challenge that they may bring by catalyzing and contributing to disinformation, fake news, all the political instability we've been observing also in Europe, but also in China. And it seems to me that in Europe, the biggest challenge right now is that the dominant approach towards dealing with these issues really focuses on what the companies originally came up with as an idea to deal with it, which is based on what's called content moderation. So trying to delete or block content. But to me, that really cures the symptoms, but not the causes. And in my work, I find a very strong relationship with the targeted advertising-based business model and these outcomes. So to me, the biggest challenge right now is to address the root causes of these issues, which are related to the business model.
So I want to go to our first polling question, and you're going to see it pop up on your screen. And the question is, how many years are we talking about until good governance catches up with tech? Now, let's think of governance, just to all of the panelists' point, beyond just regulation. This is a bigger bucket, right, of than just regulation. How long is that going to take? 20 years, 15 years, 5 years, 10 or 2. So I'll give you a minute to answer that. How long is this going to take? And then I'm going to ask each of the panelists to say how long they think it's going to take. So I don't want to influence their voting too much. See what they're going to say. I'll give you a minute. Thanks for the questions coming in. A lot of anonymous people coming in. We have, yep. I want to get to some developing countries questions that we have coming on. Things around India, and I know you're going to talk a little bit more about China. Okay, Sebastian, how are we doing on our polling? Is it coming through?
1 minute.
1 more minute, Sebastian says. So Marietje, I'm just gonna go to you while we're waiting for this 1 minute of voting. I know we talked about 3 different ways: the Chinese way, the European way, and the American way. You have a new piece out in the MIT Review about a global way. Can you just give us a little preview about what that global looks like and where you see the EU fitting into that?
Yeah, so in the article, I make the case that essentially, even though this three-way division is often cited, I mostly still see two-way. One, in the democratic world where I think thus far companies have had too much space to govern. And the second model in the sort of authoritarian space, top-down, state-driven, control-oriented governance model. And my plea is more for a cross-border democratic governance model for technology, which should also address the question from the audience about including the global south. I think for a long time, the EU or European countries and the US have been leading in developing a rules-based international order and building the institutions that went along with it. And somehow, we can talk about it longer when we have time, they've kind of hit the pause button when it came to the digital world, presumably hoping that the technologies themselves would have liberating effects, would enhance freedoms, would empower people, would emancipate individuals. And we now have too many lessons learned to conclude that that has not materialized. The promise does not automatically lead to success. And so I think it is vital, especially as democracy is under enormous pressure, that there is deliberate rulemaking, deliberate principle protection, deliberate institution building to also govern with a democratic focus in the digital world. And so I'm hoping that the EU in this case can take the leadership when it comes to finding new allies, working together across the world. Surely the transatlantic relation is still important, even though we're going through difficult times. But for a democratic model to really take hold, it needs to be global.
Great. I want to go into that a little bit more, Marietje, particularly the question on institution building. What does that mean? Because that sounds interesting. So I want to give you the poll results. I'm going to ask you all what your thoughts are. So with the audience, the least was 2 years. And then there's a tie between 20 and 15 for the next lowest, then 10. But the winner was an optimistic crowd here, was 5 years by quite a lot. So we're talking about good governance in the internet in 5 years. Danny, I'm going to ask you, what was your thought? What was your number about how long it was going to take to get this underhand in a better way with all the principles we've talked about?
I was with the 5 years.
Okay. And why? Why? That seems fast to me. Why? That seems like unbelievably fast. How can that happen?
Because I think currently the European Union is committed to making decisions, and corporations are going to respond very quickly.
Okay. There's commitment driven. We heard that from the executive vice president. Values, first principle based. Prabhat, how many years are you looking at until we have a good governance system?
It's a tough question because I think we're kind of simultaneously there already and we'll never be there. So it's something between now and infinity. I think just kind of what do we mean by good governance? I think that one of the things that maybe if we kind of have five elements that are really important to me personally. I think transparency of decision making, inclusiveness and balance of decision making, accountability of the decision making process. But at the same time, also kind of the rule of law element that Marietje mentioned right at the beginning, fundamental rights compliance, and also technological savviness. I mean, those five elements are, for me, right, the kind of the five elements of good governance in the space where we are regulating. And this is a kind of aspirational goal that you never quite reach perfectly because every part of this is kind of constantly shifting. What we mean by transparency changes all the time. Inclusiveness and balance, we understand how hard it is to kind of reach all sorts of stakeholders, how the stakeholder community shifted and skewed towards those who have more means to influence and to have their voice heard, and how hard it gets to kind of reach people who might be affected. And this links to the inequality point that one of the students made right at the beginning. Accountability is also an ever-evolving concept. We thought that transparency could substitute for accountability to transparency reports and more data, and now we understand that people are really kind of overloaded. What we're looking for is meaningful transparency. So I think it's an ever-evolving thing, and it's very difficult for me to put a time on it. But I think a more important conversation is that what do we mean exactly by good governance? And I just threw out some ideas there.
Thanks very much, Marietje. How about you? How long, with all of the caveats that's always changing. But when you ask a person in the know, there's good governance going on in technology relative today. How many years do you think?
I think the next 10 years will be really important, but I also recall when I just started as a freshly elected member of the European Parliament a little over 10 years ago, that the digital single market was the big new vision. And I couldn't wait to get it finished. I thought we had no time to lose. And I was talking to a colleague of mine who saw me getting all excited and, impatient and ready to roll. And I remember very well that he said, oh, relax, breathe in, breathe out. In 10 years, we will still be talking about a digital single market. And at the time, I thought that was the most cynical thing I heard in a long time. I thought, oh my goodness, this is why politics has to change. But lo and behold, it's actually true. We're still talking about the digital single market. We're also talking about a lot of other things, which I think is great. But these things take some time. So I would say 10 years is realistic, but I do believe that the next 10 years will be crucial for Europe in setting the tone, setting the parameters, and I can only hope that I'm wrong and that it will be done in 2 years.
Marietje, thanks for that. I've been asking this question all summer. I was with policymakers, both political appointees as well as staff, public service staff from around the world, and the 10 years was the number that most of them had. And one issue that Marietje and I have talked a lot about is this trade-off between inclusion and lawmaking and speed in lawmaking. And you can feel that tension. You heard Prabhat talking about multi-stakeholders. It takes time to hear and listen to people. So that's the difficult trade-off we have in good governance, speed versus time. I'm going to go to the audience for another poll question. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very certain, to 1 being very uncertain, do you think the European way will win out? Now, I know, Marietje, you put something on the table that it has to be global, but let's answer that question later. But the European way that Prabhat's laying out with these principles that you all have talked about. The poll should come up in a minute, and you're going to put 10 is very certain, is that we're going to do this. Lots of optimism. You heard it from the students, all the way down to 1, and we'll talk about that in a minute. While people are voting, though, I'm going to go to you, Danny, and where are you on that number? Try not to let this influence you in your number, but Danny, where are you on the European way? Very certain, not certain?
I am pretty optimistic, I have to say. I give it an 8.
An 8? Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty optimistic, mainly because I think Europe can play digital Aikido, which means making a weakness into a strength. We don't have a very strong European digital sector, which has allowed us to enforce GDPR. And I think we can also be bold in terms of some of the regulations. But I also have, I know it's very challenging. So, and we also have threat from authoritarian elements within Europe. So I'm giving it an 8.
An 8. Prabhat, how about you?
I'm also optimistic. I think 8 sounds right. Because there's a little 2 points for modesty at the end there. But just I want to repeat the point that I just made in response to the previous poll. Let's not fool ourselves that there's an end point here. There's a kind of clear point when we can say we've done it and it's over and it's finished. This is an ongoing process. There's a transformation going on. It's really a kind of deep revolution. It'd be a bit, I think, wrong and maybe even misleading to think that there's a kind of a moment when it's done and we're ready and we move on to something else. I think that here in the digital transformation that the Executive Vice President spoke about, it's also about, the goal is also the path in some ways. So I think that I would give it an 8, but with this important caveat.
The goal is the path. I really liked when the Executive Vice President was sort of being pushed on things being hard. She's like, it should be hard. This is hard work. It should be hard. We should like hard. It's like we all should take an oath to being stoic. Marietje, I know your path in politics was not easy and you've embraced hard. What is your number with the caveats of it's a long, long road?
Well, I would actually say that Europe has to be very careful not to lose the advantage it has when it comes to regulating. And this is not my wish, but this is my assessment of what I think is happening. In the United States, I see rapid catching up, not on the same principles as in Europe, but on the basis of invoking national security or, antitrust rules that are being developed or focusing on threats to democracy in different ways. So I do believe that it has taken the United States a long time to catch up with the awareness of all the harms that come with basically out of balance power for big tech companies. But at the same time, I think when the US acts, it acts fast. And this could actually have implications for Europe's ambitions, which has very much been at the forefront of regulating. Similarly, China is actually catching up in a completely different way, but should also not be underestimated. And the last thing I'd say is that for Europeans to actually succeed in setting standards, the standards also have to be percolating through successful business endeavors. So it cannot just be set by regulating, but there should also be growth, there should be innovation, there should be European successes built on top of these principles that we all hold so dearly. So I think the best thing Europeans can do is not to be complacent and to keep being very, very driven, but not to only celebrate the notion of being a super regulator without adding growth.
Thanks, Marietje. Maxwell, I hope you're still listening. I think Marietje is picking up on some of your needing jobs, needing access to capital, sort of growth, how to use technology to build the economy that we want with this great talent that is here in Europe. I'm speaking at an entrepreneur conference tomorrow, and someone's making an argument that Europeans have the best entrepreneurs in the world, and what will happen in a governed world where that can really work. So let's hear what the audience says. So most people said 7. And then as these things go, there's a lot in the middle, but then there's a lot of 3s on the results. So optimism followed by some important skeptics. I want to go to some very specific questions for each of you, and then we're going to answer some of the questions in the chat. So if you can keep your responses quite short. We can't talk about a launch of a center, Danny, and not hear a little bit more about what the center will be doing and what your vision is for this and this big question of digitization of Europe, but also digital governance. So Danny, can you tell us what to expect from this new center?
Sure. So we have discovered that most people, when they imagine the future, they're pretty fearful of digital technology. And I think at the center, we want to contribute to a positive vision of digital governance, of how we can promote public well-being. And we do that by conducting research, teaching, and also outreach activities. And I would say that probably what really makes the Center for Digital Governance special is that we, as a faculty, it brings together a group of people, Joanna Bryson, Gerhard Hammerschmidt, Turit Husted, Luciana Cingolani, Keegan McBride, who earlier also posed a question to the Vice President, who are really committed to not only be stuck in the ivory tower, but reach out and inform policymakers about what we can learn about the consequences or the empirical evidence that informs decision making.
Super. Marietje, I'm going to go over to you. You have a new academic home in Stanford, so you've been spending a lot of time in Silicon Valley, and there's been some questions here in the chat around what we can learn to do or not do from the American way. And you started talking about that a little bit, but maybe a few things that aren't so obvious as we move forward in figuring out the European way from the Americans, my people.
Yeah, well, it's nice to see the crossovers going in all directions, you know, Americans in Europe, Europeans in America. And I think we need the same kind of crossovers between the worlds of governance and the worlds of technology. And that's what I set out to do at Stanford after serving in the European Parliament. So I'm really happy and wanted to congratulate the Hertie School for this new initiative. And I look forward to fruitful cooperations. But what do I see in the United States? Well, I think one big clear experience after the COVID pandemic is how thin the buffer is for a lot of people. So how the so-called gig economy or so-called platform economy has really meant for people to live as day wagers, not even paycheck by paycheck, because these people do not have paychecks. And when there's a little bit of a crisis, and in this case, a major crisis, it means that a lot of people cannot get by. And I think we have our own problems in Europe, but this is not one of them. We do take better care of people. And I think that the investments in education, in healthcare, in social benefits for those who need it, is something unique for Europe. And it may not have been so clear, and there may have been a sort of dreamy ideal of what the major successes of entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley look like. But now that we can see the flip side, the shadow side very clearly, I'm curious to see whether this, for example, could lead to more appreciation for the need to tax tech companies, for example. There's so much revenue and profit being made without taxation. And the question is, if the profits are only going to go to the private sector, but the costs are going to lean on the public, then the imbalance is going to continue. And I personally don't think it's sustainable, but at the end of the day, this is a political question.
Big political questions. It'll be so fascinating to see how this unfolds. I know that there's some research going on at the Hertie School coming up on platform economies and governance. So we'll be hearing more about that. Prabhat, you're at the Commission doing the heavy work with all this optimism, with this stoic belief of the long road ahead. What can the Hertie Center do? What can civil society do to support that work and the vision?
Well, I think a key point is to do what we're doing today, is to engage in debate and to kind of discuss the issues and their complexity and their richness and diversity across the continent. I think it's not a top-down initiative in the sense that the Commission makes a proposal, but then there are debates at national level with the Council and the European Parliament, and really these projects are so important and they touch so many different aspects of our lives that the most important part is to research the issues and to debate them, because I think this is the kind of democratic underpinning of our legitimacy to act in the first place. So we can only welcome more debate and more discussions around, like the ones that we're having today. And even without the Commission, because there's no way we'll be able to be everywhere. But the issues that we're talking about today are really at the heart of what the vision is of the Executive Vice President and the leadership of the European Commission at the moment for the next digital decade. And it's really important that this is based on a comprehensive societal debate of how we see the way forward.
Thanks for that. I'm thinking a lot about this call for debate and the European Commission holding the heart of democracy to really do that. And we here in Europe are very happy to be living in this democracy, wanting to protect it, while worldwide people's satisfaction with democracy is going down. And anyone who's watching the US election knows that technology companies and the platform are really impacting democracy. So it seems to me that it is urgent that some of these issues get figured out, or else we won't have as vibrant of democracy. So now I want to go to a speed round. By the way, Danny, I see your colleague Joanna Bryson, who we saw in the video. She's on here on the chat. I'm going to go to a speed round, so I'm going to try to direct these to each of you. If you could just answer as quick off the top, and then we're going to have one last poll. And it's already an hour. How did that happen? So this is going to go to you, Marietje. Nuria says, why is it that big tech companies are still paying such low taxes? If this is a problem, we know it. Why is it still happening?
There's no political appetite in the United States to get this done either domestically or internationally at the OECD, which is basically the platform where this is the most advanced discussion. And there's just some news out today that it looks like the perspectives, the horizons are postponed again. And I think that it may actually lead to countries, there's been speak of this by France and other countries, to basically act regardless of a global agreement. And I think that would be a missed opportunity. But at the same time, the legitimacy for not doing anything is eroding very quickly. So the pressure on governments to act is big. Let's see whether the US election will change anything. I'm not too hopeful, but it could change the view to alliances and the appreciation for, again, balancing private and corporate profits with societal needs, especially now.
Thanks, Marietje. I'm going to ask another political question. It was the last one to come in via anonymous. And Danny or Prabhat, you tell me which one of you wants to answer this. If this is all and ultimately a political question, how far can we go if we don't address our fractured political landscape, sort of polarization, which may be a topic that you're going to be studying at the Hertie School? So maybe, Danny, I'll throw it to you. Like, shouldn't we be studying that in the role of the internet? Don't we have to tackle that in order to get to good governance?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question because social media are nowadays blamed for everything, including polarization and so forth. But if you really look into the causes of polarization, you find that a lot of the causes, at least in the US, are related to migration, people moving to areas where you have Whole Foods, you have yoga centers for the Democrats, and then certain kinds of churches for the Republicans. But I do strongly believe that social media act as a catalyzer. So, of course, we also have to tackle these issues through other means, but we can also deal with them to a certain extent when we deal with digital technology.
Super. So thanks, Prabhat. This one's going to be for you. Will be our last question, and then while he's answering it, if my friend, the tech guy, Sebastian, there's real people behind making this happen. So big gratitude to all the people who are doing that. Mackenzie Nelson of Algorithm Watch asks, how is the Commission thinking about meaningful transparency? You talked about the value of transparency. Are you auditing frameworks for algorithmic systems on the table? So how are you doing transparency? And while you're answering, a poll's going to come up basically asking you, leaving this conversation, this exciting launch. I feel like we need champagne or Prosecco. Yeah, there's both European popping. Really deep, dear congratulations to you and all of your colleagues. It's really extraordinary. We need you. We need this momentum. You're going to have a chance to vote. Are you feeling more optimistic about a European way and our ability to do this long road in a time frame, less or the same? So, Sebastian, if you could put that poll up. But on this meaningful transparency, Prabhat, could you explain what you're thinking about the Commission very shortly?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we want to be clear about is that transparency for whom and about what. So transparency for users is not the same as transparency for regulators and transparency for people who exercise oversight, or transparency towards researchers who might be scrutinizing what's going on the platform. So that's one way of breaking it down. And when we speak about meaningful transparency on an algorithmic system, there's a question that really can only be answered about experts. Are they really discriminatory, or are they kind of amplifying hateful content? This is something that an ordinary citizen cannot really be asked to check. And so the transparency towards users needs to be somewhat different. It needs to aim at empowering users that they have choices or meaningful alternatives in the way that content is kind of presented to them. So these are the kind of avenues by which we kind of break down the question of transparency by being clearer about what kind of transparency for which purpose and towards whom.
Thanks so much. Joanna Bryson says, just on this question of urgency, if we don't get this resolved in 5 years, then we won't be able to address the climate crisis. So we better do it in 5 years. What we're doing now is very urgent and it matters. And I know you're going to take that at the Hertie Center very strongly. I'm going to read out in just a minute the final results. But I just quickly, Danny, could you say 30 seconds on what we're seeing in the Global South? We've been talking a lot about Europe and China, or anyone who wants to answer this. Any insights about how digital governance is being addressed, handled, made inclusive in this global approach?
Yeah, so I can't talk about the whole Global South because I've been working on China for 20 years, but China is very actively exporting the Chinese model. It has held a world conference on internet issues annually since 2014, and many of the representatives that are coming to these events are from Russia, Pakistan, Iran, Central Asia. So I think the Chinese model is going to catch up, but of course not everywhere in the Global South.
We just heard from Gayatri Doctors. It would be great to connect with the Center for Digital Governments from India enjoying this session. So here we go, lots of partnership. So we have left a bunch of us more optimistic, most of us the same. And I think that's just the complexity of the issue. And I want to give the last word to each of your speakers. One last word, Danny, on what the center will be doing, just in a word.
Oh, in a word, we're going to promote good models for digital governance.
There you go. A sentence is good. Prabhat, a word to leave us optimistic, or a sentence?
Opportunity. I think this is let's look ahead, hopeful towards a brighter future. I think it can be done.
Yeah, we definitely, Ray Bradbury said that humans start off with a romance before it comes reality. And I think we need to be living in a romance of a digital world that works for all of us. Marietje, what is your romance or a word you want to leave us with?
Cooperation. I hope there will be a lot of fruitful cooperations coming to and from the center, and that between the worlds of good governance, governance in general, and technology, there will be mutual learning. There's often a trend to say, oh, you know, policymakers and lawmakers don't know anything about technology, and then often people laugh. But clearly there's a lot of learning to go around when it comes to engineers that could use some learning about democracy and the rule of law. So I hope there will be cooperation and mutual exchange of knowledge.
We've had two great politicians, the Executive Vice President and Marietje here as examples of people who are in politics and really care. And my last word is really grateful. Grateful for all of you that have tuned in. Grateful for the Hertie School, the European Commission. We all could be doing lots of things with our time. That we choose to do this really matters. Joanna Bryson said we have 5 years. We have elections coming up. This is the heart of democracy and the heart of human existence. Not overplaying it. This is really fundamental stuff. So everyone keep collaborating, keep optimistic, and know that it's hard, but hard is good. So thanks everyone for joining. Congratulations to the Hertie Center. Thanks Marietje. Thanks Prabhat.
Thanks. Bye,
Thanks
everybody.
Danny. Thanks to all the team who put it together.
Thank you.
Check us out. Bye.